We can start. I can introduce myself, and then we can go in the order of presenters. Now, I've kind of done it by last names, but we can go in whatever order the presenters like. So, Rashida, it might have been thrown off because you're going to be representing. So, you know, as I kind of cycle off my introduction, then we can have each person that's on the line that is a presenter to present themselves, and then we can go in the order of last name, or we can just go with whoever's ready to do their presentation. Does that sound like a plan?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so my name is Warren Haynes. I'm currently interim vice president of diversity, equity, inclusion here in the Kansas City region at Metropolitan Community College. We have about 5 campuses here. I've taught in the public administration space at Kentucky State University and at Rutgers University, Camden. Dr. Richard Gregory Johnson, who's kind of convening this conference and doing a lot of the background work. He was on my dissertation committee when I was a doctoral student. So this social equity space has been very near and dear. In fact, my dissertation kind of dealt with social equity, but I'm glad to moderate this and glad to have you all here. And we will start with Professor Darling. Did I pronounce
yes,
that
that's right? Yes, everyone can hear me, yes?
All right.
So I'm Marsha Darling, and I'm a professor in the College of Arts and Sciences here in New York on the Garden City campus of Adelphi University, where I'm also special assistant to the president for strategic initiatives. So thank you.
All right. And Rashida, I think you're probably next on deck with the way I had the presenters outline, even though you're filling in. So feel free to go.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Rashida Kelly. I am a graduate research assistant. I will be co-presenting with Ashley Robbins. She's also on the call today. We are presenting under the leadership of Dr. Schnequa Nicole Diggs from North Carolina Central University.
All right, so if Ashley's on, maybe she can introduce herself. Ashley, is Ashley on?
Sorry, unmuting thing, you know, still get the Zoom thing going.
Right.
My name is Ashley Robbins. As Rashida indicated, we are graduate research assistants for Dr. Diggs, and we will be presenting for you all today.
Great. And do we have Danielle on the line?
Yes.
All right.
Everybody. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. My name is Danielle Holler. I'm a biracial and physically disabled interdisciplinary research student representing the undergraduate population at Florida International University. I have a student-led organization called Zebra Care Initiative that focuses on bringing inclusivity to marginalized medical communities, such as the rare disease and disability community. And I can put a link in the chat for you guys today.
Great. So why don't we start with Professor Darling? Do we have her presentation over there?
Jillian, is it on screen? Ah, here it is. Yes, screen share. You're the best. Can everyone see the slides okay? Just give me a thumb so I know. Oh, great. Okay, good. Let me put slideshow on. Okay. All right. So the focus of my comments today really weave together, and it turns out that it may be fortuitous that I'm starting because as a historian that's examined the long road to human and civil rights for the differently able, disabled, and differently able communities, I'm very well aware of how long the struggle has been from dualistic thinking, product of the eugenics movement, its direct assault on disabled persons, both in this country as well as in Europe and other parts of the world, right through the social justice disability movement, the identity politics of that, of people stepping forward to say, nothing's going to be about us unless it's with us. That level of assertion that's really blossomed in the past 50, 60 years since the civil rights movement. And then currently where we are, where disability is now in our thinking parts of diversity and inclusion. So it's been a long, long road. And this is just a brief timeline. There's no time in the brief conversation that we have today to really step through these different threshold points, but it's just to say that dating from the 19th century, there have been institutional and policy decisions to institutionalize differently able and disabled persons. And dating all the way back, at least for the records that I've found, to the Perkins Institution back in 1848, coming through the early 20th century, the Commonwealth of Virginia state law began involuntary sterilization. It was sanctioned a few years later by Buck v. Bell, SCOTUS decision in 1927, that actually authorized the involuntary sterilization of Carrie Buck. It turned out that within 10 years of her being sterilized, she was finally actually tested. And in fact, she had normal intelligence. And so in 1939, again, so, the disability community has been very, very keen and clear about the ways in which there has been a frontal attack on differently able persons, including during World War II, where Charles Davenport, from American eugenicists, was one of Hitler's principal consultants in designing the euthanasia program against disabled people. And then coming quickly through the 70s, finally a big ray of light following the formal or inclusive of the formal civil rights movement, where the disability rights community really stepped forward and began to impact policy, both public policy and public administrators, as well as laws, and slowly, the private sector. And coming to most recent, not really recently, but the most recent ADA amendments of 2008, so we've really come a long way. There's still a much longer way to go, but we've come a long way in registering human and civil rights for the disabled community. So if we keep the disabled community, keep disability in perspective, the US Census has noted that more than 57.5 million people with disabilities live in the United States. That number translates to 1 in 5 or 20% of our population. That means it's the largest single minority group in America. It reframes how we think and talk about different ability. So despite legislative victories, many differently able people feel they are still largely invisible. And the work of the disability rights movement has been to change that perception, both at the personal level, but also to impact public administrators and hopefully by extension, the private sector as well. And that means that disability rights fits within a restorative justice framework, which is not only about healing individual harm, but about transforming social structures and public and private administration of institutions, and ultimately organizations and companies that are themselves purveyors of massive harm. And so I've also given you citations for those of you that are interested in following up on the social science research here. You can make note of the scholar's last name. So thus restorative justice addresses not only symptoms, but also the underlying root causes of disability injustice. And so Scholar Davis compares this to being a skilled gardener who is devoted not only to each individual plant, but to the health of the soil. So not only helping individuals, but changing systems, changing public administration, changing management. So disability is now part of the lexicon, the montage of our diversity. And that's a good thing. That doesn't mean all is fixed and said and done. So diversity in the workplace refers to different types of people, characteristics. Inclusion is an organization's strategic approach to creating a diverse workspace. And then the processes and implications and effects of organizational or institutional approval of diversity and inclusion determines the overall positivity of the workplace. And so it's complex, but it's also a manageable level of conceptual engagement and change. And fostering the right organizational culture is one of management's most important responsibilities, because according to Lucier and Hendon, establishing shared values, beliefs, and assumptions shows employees how they are expected to act within the workplace, not just differently able employees, but all employees. Okay. Well, wait, let me get to the bottom here. Okay, good. So fostering inclusiveness. We know that an inclusive workplace is one that makes all employees feel that they are valued. These are essential components of organizational, institutional, or company structure and operation. Again, a successful inclusive environment establishes strategic methods, i.e. employee resource groups, cultural training, disability training, safe zone, familiarity with ADA legislation in place for fostering diversity in the workplace or organization. And so fostering inclusiveness does not only benefit individual clients and employees, it also increases the economic success of the institution, organization, or business. And continuing, I would suggest there are 3 core advantages that manifest consistently across the literature on inclusion: employee effectiveness, employee satisfaction, and improve organizational outcomes. And we know that once we allow individuals to be themselves at work, to feel comfortable in their identities, to feel supported and welcomed and included, employees' perceptions of belongingness and uniqueness within the group improve. And when employees feel confident in who they are as part of an organization, their job performance, engagement, and overall satisfaction increases. And thus employees are more productive individually in an inclusive environment, and they work better together in teams in an inclusive environment. And so I know I'm moving through this quickly. All of this is easily said, much more challenging and difficult to implement and to make happen. But of course, if we don't set the vision and the goal for moving to this level of inclusion and engagement, it won't happen. So inclusive work environments have higher financial returns than workplaces that dismiss diversity and dismiss disability engagement. This is partly because fostering inclusion positively affects employee productivity, but it also is a contributing factor in that clients and customers are increasingly valuing organizations and companies that are visibly diverse and visibly diverse in holistic ways, meaning not just visibly diverse in token endeavors, but visibly diverse in ways that integrate diverse, differently able and disabled people. And so according to Turbo, a diverse organization realizes the benefits from its ability to retain talent, a diverse range of talent, to be in tune with market conditions, and to work creatively and to innovate. These are cutting edge concepts for any level of public and private managers. Evidence suggests that employees today, especially millennials, prefer to work in a diverse, inclusive workspace. Companies will not get or keep the best talent if diversity and inclusion, including differently able people and disabled people, is not a functioning part of their operations. Showing diversity in the workplace advertises diversity itself. A company that shows diversity to be a contributing factor to its overall success convinces applicants that they are an asset to the business. And when employees perceive that an organization accepts them as they are, they have a higher level of commitment to the organization, according to Scholar Findler. In the same way, applicants who perceive inclusiveness in an organization are more likely to commit to the company and the company's goals and direction. And then towards wrapping up, challenges that institutions must go beyond the recruitment stage, which means they check a token diversity box. They have to allow those who are recruited for leadership positions to be effective at their stated job. They have to provide job training, incentives. Employees, applicants, and clients look to leaders in an organization as an example in the overall workplace environment. And a company's commitment to diversity needs to come from the highest management levels and should be made highly visible. The leadership should identify the need for a strong diversity culture and foster cultural change to sustain an inclusive environment. And the last 1 or 2 slides, structural frameworks for increasing disability, diversity, and inclusion for public managers. Organizations should make roles and responsibilities clear and allow for coordination between workplace partners to equitably address inequity. So for example, if an employee experiences workplace discrimination, a clear reporting process that controls that are in place with controls to ensure protection against retaliation may be more likely to lead to positive change than a structure characterized by unclear processes and roles. Organizations that develop relationships with diversity organizations, professional membership, churches, the leadership of diversity rights movements and chapters and that diversity rights leadership across the country may be best equipped to ensure a pipeline of diverse workers at various career stages. And organizations that affirm the likelihood of a diverse range of workers will have structures in place that allow them to monitor numeric representation. So very much bringing us forward. And then a human resources framework is hiring and development practice should affirm the unique cultural experiences and resourcefulness and ingenuity of differently able persons of color. I would be remiss if I didn't add the intersectionality of race and ethnicity to disability. It is clearly as longstanding as the disability rights issues itself. These are persons who have overcome tremendous structural obstacles, not just their different ability, but also of racism and often classism. Differently able persons of color, employees' experience and insight should be viewed as a valuable resource to be cultivated rather than devalued and or exploited. And differently able persons of color employees should be equally represented among potential leaders who possess the freedom to challenge organizational traditions and strategic directive contrast to human resources approaches that stifle employee input or emphasize the need for compliance. And so here, this is just about, as I close, employees should be able to express disagreement with the firm's diversity and inclusion efforts and still be deemed a valuable employee who's able to lead on positive change. So hopefully this so thank you. Tried to keep it to about 10 minutes. I think that was the request. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to try to hold the questions to the end since we started a little late. So we'll have Danielle up next. You ready for us?
I'm ready.
All right, great.
All right. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Danielle Holler from Florida International University. I'm an undergraduate research student, and I wanted to start off by saying I am honored to have my undergraduate proposal accepted on advocating for accessibility and disability awareness in higher education from a student's perspective for this 21st Annual Social Equity and Leadership Conference. A quick shout out and special thank you to Dr. Agatha Caraballo, who is my mentor from Florida International University, and her co-chair, Jose, who together have done an excellent job with organizing this conference. And thank you. I wanted to speak on this panel to raise awareness about some barriers to accessibility in higher education and what I've begun to do at my school to help facilitate change in the way of restorative justice, much like Ms. Darling brought up. Disability does not discriminate. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what race you are, what age you are. It just does not discriminate. And accessibility is an important in every aspect of life, from the workplace to medical care and higher education, and in all the many intersecting identities. Many times, inclusive design is not considered, and not just in architecture, but also in technology, on websites. I've seen some really cool, new, innovative techniques to provide like screen reading for those who have visual impairments, or just videos that read off what is going on your web page rather than somebody having to spend a long time looking through it. So those are other ways that accessibility is just not often considered, and I'm seeing a lot more of that as I go into this school and into on LinkedIn and a lot of places. Students are often unaware of their limitations because we're students. We haven't really gotten out into the world to function yet. So therefore, we don't know how to ask for accommodations. And there are few, if any, organizations on site that provide a community for us to share our hopes, our dreams, our concerns, and to discuss the disability or accessibility options to make strides towards a change. However, this is something that can be looked at further through the lens of the general public, practitioners and academics, such as yourselves, and as well as those with lived experiences, by submitting public comment on and being part of the conversation. Currently, I'm working with several organizations within my school. The FIU Office of Social Justice and Inclusion and I are working together in creating programs on demand for students and faculty that wish to engage and receive education about inclusive design and user experience, how to speak intentionally in regards to those with disabilities or differently abled folks, how to identify and ask for accommodations, because that is like a really difficult thing to do if you don't know what you need, removing barriers to access, and building a community around accessibility and intersectionality inclusion. The FIU Foray Institute for Civic Leadership is working with me by utilizing our knowledge of public policy and the ability to publicly comment to voice a community effort to make changes in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Because you can't really have diversity, equity, and inclusion without accessibility. In fact, that's the underlying issue I believe that needs to be addressed in DEI. And the NIH recently held a poll, not a poll, but like a public comment where you could go as an organization and type up a nice long comment of what you think might need to be changed in the workplace to include accessibility and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I made sure that I publicly commented and got ideas. We had a meeting from multiple people on LinkedIn who are also, involved in this work. And so we have various perspectives that we were able to gather just by having a conversation. And that's where it starts. That's where change really starts. And the FIU Honors College is working with me to create our very first student organization in the fall that promotes accessibility in higher education. And we're going to be pulling together the voices of those who have lived experiences and building community. We're also doing research to find the accessibility gaps in marginalized communities so that we can raise awareness on these issues and work toward a solution that does foster accessibility and inclusivity within our campus. I don't have a really long speech or anything, but that is what I'm working on right now as an undergraduate. And I wanted to raise awareness and bring it to this conference to show that we can make strides and we can make changes. We just have to be part of that conversation. Yeah, somebody in the chat is saying an accessibility gap is when captions are not available. That is something that is so imperative because even though I have my vision, I still need to read what I'm learning, and a lot of people do. And so having captions are just one small thing that we can do to make everybody's life a little bit easier. But thank you so much for having me as a panelist today and at this conference. And I'll stay and stick around if you have any questions for me at the end. And have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you, Danielle. Did Hugo ever cycle on?
I don't see him.
Okay. We will go to Ashley and Rashida.
Thank you so much. What we're going to do is share our screen for our presentation.
Can y'all see?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Good afternoon. My name once again is Rashida Kelly and Ashley Rollins. We're both graduate research assistants. We're also first year public administration graduate students at North Carolina Central University. What we're going to be talking about today is the perceptions of inclusion in public workplaces, specifically in the state of North Carolina that we are gathering our studying information from. Next slide. So the context and purpose of our research is that we're going to, next slide, please. The purpose of our study is to provide a theoretical and practical context for better understanding inclusion in public organizations by examining the employees' perceptions and attitudes of inclusion in public workspaces in North Carolina state agencies. We will be reviewing the interaction between diversity and diversity management and perceived inclusion. Also examine how inclusion has been handled in existing literature, discussing the role of inclusive leadership, exposing a theoretical framework, and overviewing data. Next slide, please. Some of the theories that we have found in our research that have contributed to the understanding and importance of diversity and diversity management and inclusion: representativeness or representative bureaucracy, social identity theory, social exchange theory, critical disability theory, critical race theory, intersectionality, as Danielle brought up, and being in the minority has significant effects on individuals' experiences in the workplace. Next slide. The process of inclusion that we will be reviewing and researching: the individual identity, a person's lived experiences, their expectations. What is the perception of the DEI commitment and the statement? The equitable hiring practices and promotion practices. What is the perception of this? The inclusive public management leadership, an individual perception of inclusion, job performance and satisfaction, and evaluation, which leads into some of the key variables that we are researching. Myself specifically, I am researching the key variable of age and ageism, understanding ageism and how it is perceived in the workplace, and how individual and employee feels. As everyone on this call and at this conference, age is inevitable for all of us. How do we perceive those inclusive practices, in the workplace when we are of age? And the next key variable that I'm going to segue over to Ashley Robbins of her key variable of disability.
So in addition to being an MPA student, I also work in disability services at Duke University as an assistive technology coordinator, parent students, and faculty with disabilities with appropriate aids to assist them to do their job or function in school. And so what I will be researching in my aspect of the paper is how organizations, particularly within the public sector and government agencies, are moving beyond rhetoric about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and creating a culture of accessibility for their disabled employees in regards to recruitment, retention, promoting employees with disabilities. And some of those would include examples of enabling captions in all virtual meetings and providing an accessibility statement for events and programmings to ensure they're providing their employees with the access that they need, and moving beyond just the rhetoric of disability being a protected class in regards to employment rights. Disabled people are often excluded from conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and are not actively involved in the formation of DEI initiatives. And this is in spite of the fact that disability status is the one social identity that can intersect all others, as Danielle mentioned earlier. So you can be disabled in any race, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation, age, gender identity, etc. And there's also the fact that we all can become disabled at any time. And if we live long enough, we'll probably experience some level of disability. So it's important to center disability and accessibility in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. But this is also difficult to do and assess because employees must self-identify, and it's a voluntary process, which many employees are reluctant to do. Some of those reasons for not wanting to self-identify include fear of retaliation, fear of being denied promotions or being stigmatized and stereotyped, or also being defined by their disability or tokenized, which Danielle also mentioned in her presentation. The theories that I'll be focusing on will be critical disability theory, which examines intersectionality and how racism and ableism operate in conjunction with one another, and social identity theory, which looks into how social behavior is determined by the characters and motivations of the person as an individual and by their group membership. Some of the concepts and considerations that I will be researching include the social model of disability, which is a different way of looking at disability and understanding disability as a form of exclusionary social oppression and a natural facet of diversity and not a problem that needs to be fixed, an individual's issue that has to be mitigated or rectified. Whereas the medical model of disability names disability as deviation from the normal and a problem needing to be fixed for an individual person and not a societal barrier that needs to be overcome. And I'll also be looking into the social identity wheel, which is examining identities, all of our identities, and how we perceive ourselves and how we think others perceive us based on those different identities. And so we are still, Dr. Diggs is still working on our IRB paperwork before we can actually start asking some questions of public sector employees. But we intend to reach out to DEI consultants, compliance officers to see how they are gauging the effectiveness of their DEI initiatives and try to identify maybe some gaps in making employees feel more inclusive beyond just the policies that are written. And Rashida, did you have anything else you wanted to contribute?
No, we just would like to thank everyone for allowing us the opportunity to, one, be a part of this wonderful conference and also being able to present today. We thank you so much.
All right, we have a little more time and we'll open it up for some questions and answer. But I wanted to give a shout out to one of my doctoral faculty. I didn't realize she was on the call here, Dr. Heather from the University of Baltimore. She was also on my dissertation committee there. So nice to see you, Dr. Heather. And we will open it up for any questions here. But one of the things that I was thinking about as you were all talking, critical race theory, along with some of these other theories, is a hotbed in our current ecosystem. How do we incorporate these theories that might be perceived as a threat in some spaces? Now, I'm here in Midwest and Missouri. I'm originally from New Jersey. So coming from a more progressive New York, New Jersey area into this space, it's, and trying to move this diversity, equity, inclusion, and all of these things that kind of surround this. Disabilities is one of the things that we're trying to move into a more progressive advocacy space at the institution that I'm at. But I'd like to open up with that question, and then we can open up for others to engage. Anyone? And then another question while we're thinking on that, what can we do to enhance the advocacy space in disabilities and other things that we're talking about on this conference call and this Zoom presentation, this social equity conference? We've got so much to unpack here, but those are two questions that I have. But let's open it up for others as we start thinking about the initial questions that I posed. Any questions or comments from our presenters or those that are on the conference call in terms of what you've heard, what you've thought about, any future conversations or ideas?
Hey, this is Hillary. I thought this was terrific. This was just a really terrific presentation and so important when we're talking about inclusion and what that really means. And as somebody who's a former practitioner, I also understood the challenges of working with folks and having people prepared for certain spaces, because we're not always talking about physical ability differentials, but we're talking about intellectual disability differentials as well. And I think that as we're really opening this up, how broad we look at our catchment of inclusion, it's really important we think about what it means for our human resources management piece. And I had a question about this, about technology when we're looking at a lot of remote work. And I'm just curious as to what our panelists think of that, because I think that, you know, we're trying to include people, we're trying to normalize differences and make sure everybody has a seat at the table. But my question is, as we're looking at more about the influence of technology and remote working because of the COVID pandemic, what does that mean for folks? Because if you're working remotely, you're not there. You're not in person. You're not seen the same way. I know here at PACE, we've had trouble hiring folks unless it was fully remote. So I even see some changes in the expectations. But do we think that remote work environment could be beneficial, could be harmful? Just curious.
So in the work that I do, I deal with employees and students with disabilities. So once we get past the digital divide aspect of technology can kind of be an equalizer for people, because, you know, now people who may not have been able to presently go to work but be able to produce, there's lots of jobs that nothing about being in the office is a requirement to do the job that you do. And so people who typically have been excluded from doing certain jobs now have the opportunity to do work that they maybe not had an opportunity to do before. But that also means, like, those of us on the other side have to be cognizant of having certain privileges when it comes to technology, and know, like, if there's somebody in this meeting among us now who's hearing impaired, they don't have equal access, because the captions are not enabled in this meeting. And that's something that's free and just takes a second of mindfulness to do. And because if you don't have a hearing, if you're not hard of hearing, then you don't necessarily have to think about that. So that's why it's more important to continue to have more and more people at the table, so the accessibility concerns are addressed at the beginning, and it's not something that someone has to ask for. I shouldn't have to ask to have access. Access should be provided to me, unless it's in extraordinary rare case, like ASL interpreter. That's something you have to book and plan for. But when we have tools on our side that we can mitigate some of this, we should make sure that we are cognizant and utilizing those.
Yes, and I agree with everything Ashley said. And with technology in, changing inevitably, it is up to leaders to have that secure understanding of what is needed and provide those opportunities to disability, and even with what I'm researching, are of age and elderly, because, having that opportunity to learn an updated software or, hardware program, we should just be providing, that accessibility to our workers in the workplace.
And just being mindful, like, there's certain meetings where people are required to have their camera on, where there are people who have psychological disorders that make it hard for them to be on camera. It makes them anxious to be on camera. And so, it's about kind of relinquishing some of this control that we have and wanting to do things in a specific way, and not realizing that there are multiple ways to get to the same destination, and bringing more people into the conversation so that we are, aware of the privileges that we have and not having to think about certain things. Because accessibility is central to equity, because you're looking at some of the people who have the access to the least resources continuously being excluded in some form or fashion, even in places where equity is central to the conversation.
I see two hands up, Holmes and Moringa. We'll go in that order. And I thought I saw Dr. Heather, but maybe she cycled off and she'll join us back again. Please feel free.
Heather, do you want to go first?
Oh, yeah, all I have is comment. I think it's wonderful that you all are doing this research. I noticed yesterday somebody made a comment of the fact that there's just been a lack of disability research within the field of public administration and social equity. So I'm just excited about that piece. That's all.
So I actually just want to comment on a theme that I heard throughout our presenters between Dr. Darling. I think you presented this notion of dissent and sort of making sure that employees have an opportunity to voice. With Danielle Haller, you talked about this opportunity for individuals to have on-demand training. And Rashida and Ashley, one of the works that you're doing with Dr. Diggs is this notion that we're asking employees, what does it mean to have an inclusive workplace? And so I see a couple other comments here coming up. And so I'm just curious as to your experience or lessons learned in terms of just making that pivot to saying, let's not come from the top and say, this is what we're going to do, but actually asking what individuals need. What are some lessons learned through that process?
So Marsha, if I can jump in, I am a special assistant to the president here. So I've looked closely at the initiatives and how some of them have developed around belonging here at the university. And instead of it being either bottom or top, both are important for different kinds of reasons. Top management level administrative policy leadership is important, and buy-in, because it models and it sends a verbal or a nonverbal message that this is important. This is important enough for us to focus on. This is part of our strategic focus, and this is part of our implementation. This is what we're going to spend money on. This is what we're going to commit, hiring people through, various staffing positions. And then I think what I'm hearing from your concern is changing the culture, which isn't as simple as having a model from the top, from the administrative level down to everybody else, but really creating buy-in at the level of everyday engagements between employees, creating buy-in around where people do job searches, how they announce job searches. Is it business as usual, where the announcements for positions are sent to certain kinds of audiences, certain organizations, but not to others? How to get people thinking more broadly about where to post a job and how to reach beyond the usual. Yes, you're going to reach the places you're familiar with, but how to really put together a search committee where some of the people on the committee can say, oh, but hey, what about the following? We didn't send it over here to different kinds of interests. To the differently able community. So that's a matter of changing the culture. And that is not as simple as having senior level administrative buy-in. That really takes, I think, employee training, including having, for at least here, our DEI training includes training around differently able. So part of what is mandated for all employees is that once a year or once every other year, they undertake a number of, there's a portfolio of courses. We're trying to move them online, but part of that is part of one of the modules focuses on inclusiveness, being inclusive of differently able and disability community. And so, yes, it's going to take a while because people who've been around 10, 20, 25 years haven't really necessarily brought themselves along to think about this, but everybody needs to be thinking about this. And so I would argue for both approaches.
Yeah, I think some of the the training stops at compliance. And they're I think you have to be intentional about asking people. Because I also try to do accessibility stuff in the community. And I asked a group of parents with children with disabilities, when you show up to an event, What are 3 things that you see or experience that make you feel like this is an inclusive, accessible place for your child, even if all your needs aren't met? And it's simple things like having a quiet space where their child can decompress if it gets too noisy, or just putting something on the event page. If you have any accessibility needs, reach out to us so that we can make sure you have equal access. So that's a cue to them that the people are thinking about those things and they can reach out. How complex is your accommodation process? Do your employees know you have an accommodation process? What are you doing to actively center disability and not make it something like a special treatment situation? How are we incorporating, creating a culture that's just all around inclusive at the top in the beginning and setting those precedents? If we're gender inclusive, then in a Zoom meeting, everybody should have their pronouns in their Zoom name. So that is a signal that this is what we practice in this place. If we're in a Zoom meeting, we turn the captions on. And if we know somebody amongst us has a visual impairment, we get into the practice of describing ourselves because they can't see us. And just being mindful of the things that we don't have to think about, that we don't experience.
Maringa, I see your hand up.
Good morning, President. I'm Maringa.
We can't hear you that good.
Can you? Hello, can you hear?
Looks like you're going in and out.
Oh,
Maybe you can put it in the chat.
okay. I'll put it in.
While Maringa's doing that, any of the questions or comments? We don't have too much more time, but I wanted to give others an opportunity to engage in these conversations.
Dr. Haynes, I wanted to come back to something you asked about critical race theory a moment ago. And just say one of the reasons I started with the long road to human and civil rights, instead of just simply coming to, let's say, legislation or the actions of the Supreme Court, is precisely centered around what critical race theory tries so very eloquently to do, which is to say to people that contemporary challenges and marginalization, issues of marginalization and abandonment have historical roots, and that if we can bring ourselves to honestly look at that and assess that, we ask different questions about equity in the moment than we would otherwise. So that's, I mean, in the little bit of time we have, that's what I would just quickly say, not so much about all of critical race theory, but in terms of its really pointed and concrete contribution. And quite frankly, I am puzzled, given how old it is, given how long it's been out there, at the recent clamor. I mean, I've said to my students, it almost makes me wonder if people are responding to critical race theory like it came along last year or year before last. And it has quite a depth in intellectual circles and social justice circles.
Thanks for sharing. I appreciate that. Any other questions? I see Maringa, have you been able to?
Still trying to get in.
Trying, or maybe you can come back on and see if we can hear you again as well.
Hello, can you hear me?
A little better. Why don't you try to ask the question?
Okay.
Comment.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you. A presentation.
Can you put it in the chat? Maybe, Sharfolk? Maringa, can you put it in the chat?
Yes, it's already in the chat.
This is an example.
I didn't see it. Did anybody else see it? If they can, they can read it.
I saw it. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, can you?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, so she said, thank you, Dr. Darling, for explaining the difference between diversity and inclusion. What are some examples of activities that an organization can do to be inclusive? And I know that Ashley posted some really great stuff in the chat. And again, apologies to everyone about the transcript issue. I've been trying to figure that out. And I will definitely work on it moving forward and make sure the hosts know.
Yeah, I thought Ashley's contribution in a concrete way was very focused by way of offering examples of what an organization or institution can do to send just the right message towards a differently abled community, and that people are paying attention. Do you mean beyond Ashley's contribution, Ms. Berenga?
Yes, so I work for a tech company in Silicon Valley, and want to know some of the and that to
No, you're still breaking up. So I'm looking at your question. I mentioned required staff training within an organization that is inclusive of differently able and disability training, and not just in a tacked on way, but in a way that's integral to how in this case, the university or organization sees itself going forward.
So I know she mentioned Silicon Valley, and she works in a tech company there. So I'm wondering if is there something kind of dealing with that particular ecosystem that she's trying to address and tie that into the public space. I'm just not sure.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, we're right down to 229.
Yeah, we're right here. Any final thoughts, closing comments, observations?
I just want to say I'm very glad to hear about the research going on at North Carolina Central. Bravo.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. My daughter's looking into NC Central or NC State's MPA program now. So great work there.
I did my undergrad at NC State.
Okay. Yeah. She went to Winston-Salem State. So she's looking into graduate programs now. So she'll be at one of them and probably will be intermingling with you as y'all kind of working at public administration space down there. So thanks a lot. I think we're right on time or a little bit over. Where are we? We good?
Oh yeah, we're right at 2:30.
Right at 2:30. Okay. So we want to thank you for participating, and we look forward to seeing you at some of the other workshops and talks. And it's been a pleasure to moderate and meet some of you colleagues and see some that I haven't seen in a while. And we'll be looking for all of you to do great things in this work that we're trying to do in a very interesting and challenging time that we're working and living in.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you.